Good evening, everyone. My name is Emily Hooper-Lansana, and I work here at the Logan Center as Senior Director of Programming and Engagement. And it is my honor to welcome all of you to this celebration of the legacy of Ida B. Wells. Tonight's program is jointly presented by the Forum for Free Expression, the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, and the Reva and David Logan Center for the Arts. At this time in history, at this moment in this country, tonight seems particularly important. Ida B. Wells has said, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." We hope that this evening will be a moment of turning a light. There is an African principle of Sankofa that says, we look back in order to go forward. As we have prepared for this evening, I've been thinking about how important it is for us to look back. And this evening is a celebration of many ways in which we are looking forward, to think about how history is important, how we reflect on history, how we reflect on what is happening in the world around us through our journalism, and also to recognize that the artists have an important voice in speaking truth to power. We thank all of you for deciding that it was important to be here tonight. We want to thank the Zell Family Foundation for their lead support for the Chicago Forum Zell Speaker and Event Series that made tonight possible. And we want to thank everyone behind the scenes who has worked so very hard, all of the staff members, to make sure that our wonderful speakers are here tonight. And we hope that you all will be inspired and encouraged. Thank you. Now, it is my honor to introduce to you Dan Duster. Dan Duster is a motivational speaker and success coach. He impacts audiences across the nation through his speeches and workshops. As the great-grandson of Ida B. Wells, he talks about her struggles and triumphs in the late 1800s to motivate audiences to address the challenges we face today. He is born and raised on the south side of Chicago. He has always been a leader. He has served on the boards of several nonprofits to help guide their vision and implement their mission. He has also served as a consultant with dozens of organizations to improve their effectiveness by leading workshops on topics that include strategic planning, effective communication, and creating a comfortable and just workplace. He has spoken at the U.S. Senate press conference and attended the White House in 2022 for the signing of the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill. He shared with us that he was at Columbia earlier this week for the unveiling of a new bust in honor of Ida B. Wells, how important it is to be able to have someone from her family to be part of this evening's celebration of her legacy. Dan Duster.
All right. Well, good evening. Thanks everybody for coming out to celebrate Ida B. Wells. As Emily mentioned, I'm one of the descendants. She is my great grandmother. A lot of people want to know what the lineage is. So you see in the picture, Ida had 4 children. So Ida actually married Ferdinand Barnett, who was a widower. He actually had 2 kids, and then they had 4 kids together. The youngest one there being Alfreda, and Alfreda had 5 children, one of them being Donald. Donald had 3 children, one of them being Dan. So that's the lineage. And so I was asked to speak tonight about some things that Ida did really to speak up for others and help give others a voice. So I'll talk about her life, her accomplishments, and put the context of her speaking up for others as part of that. But part of the other thing is I'm excited. Ida has been getting a lot more recognition in the recent years, so I just wanted to share a few things with you on that. Was just in New York on Monday, along with Paula Giddings, who you'll see, she's one of the panelists. But Columbia University, their School of Journalism, unveiled a bust of Ida B. Wells, dead center when you walk in. And so that's awesome. There's a play on Broadway called Suffs, short for suffragist, of course, which Ida was one of them. I met the person who plays Ida, so incredible play. She did an incredible job and learned a lot. So it's a musical, but like I said, it was incredible. Some other things, being here in Chicago, the street renaming of Congress to Ida B. Wells Parkway, that happened a little. That's great, and it's a bit of history on that, is that they wanted to rename Balboa, and there was a lot of resistance from the Italian-American community. And so it's a win-win, because Congress is a lot bigger and better. So let that happen. There's a high school out in Portland, so several schools have been changing their name to Ida, one here in Chicago, but there's one in Portland that changed their name from Woodrow Wilson to Ida B. Wells. So, yeah, just a lot of cool stuff going on. And my sister's actually in Mississippi doing a speaking engagement. So just happy that she's getting the recognition. There's going to be a quarter. So the U.S. Mint is issuing a quarter next year of Ida as well. So just a lot of cool stuff going on. So Ida, born into slavery in Holly Springs, Mississippi, 1862. So of course, both of her parents were slaves. Some things that values that she got from her parents. One, her mom was a slave that was sold off from Virginia, and her mom never saw some of the siblings that she was separated from, and told Ida that story. So Ida definitely valued family and keeping family together. Her mom, Lizzie, was a cook. Her dad, Jim, was a carpenter, and they were very involved in the community. Her father, so she was born, of course, the context is she was born during Reconstruction, right, or just before Reconstruction. So she grew up having privileges that blacks had during that time frame before the Jim Crow laws. So to have a privilege and then have it taken away from you, that's a different type of mindset than, just never having it at all. So, she grew up, her family sent the kids to school. Her mom went to school with them until she could read and write, and her mom was very religious, always carried a Bible with her, as did Ida. And Ida would sometimes read the newspaper to her father's friends, because again, most black people were illiterate at that time. So she got practice, reading the paper and doing public speaking at a very young age. At the age of 16, yellow fever went throughout the South and killed tens of thousands of people, including both of her parents and one of her younger siblings. And there was talk about dismantling the family, like 2 kids would go with one person and so forth. And I was like, no, I'm going to get a job. I'll keep my family together. And folklore has it from my father that they were patronizing, kind of patted her on the head. It's like, you're a girl. You can't do that. And after several more minutes of discussion, supposedly there was a rifle on the mantle, and she got the rifle and was like, look, I'm going to take care of my family. And they said, oh, well, why didn't you say so? We'll let you do it. So yeah, at the age of 16, she was adamant about taking care of her family. So she got a job and commuted during the week. And of course, there was help for taking care of the family, but the family stayed together as a unit, which is what she wanted. And again, another value that's been passed down during the generations is that the family is valuable. We got to take care of family. So a couple other things that she did. She got moved to Memphis, got a job as a school teacher, really kind of a suburb of Memphis, and then eventually worked in the Memphis school system. She enjoyed writing. So she was a journalist for free for a few years, if you will. And then she wrote an article about the school systems, talking about the disparity. She worked at a segregated school, so all-black school, and talked about the disparity between the white schools that had proper funding, adequate class size, and proper resources versus the black schools that overcrowded, underfunded, under-resourced. So she didn't get fired, but the next semester they didn't renew her contract. And so along that same time frame, she negotiated to be the co-owner and editor of the Memphis Free Speech, which is a black newspaper in Memphis. And so that, not being able to return to work, she was like, okay, I've got to do this full time. So that's what she did. And then as a journalist, she wrote about, again, the context is that women write about stereotypical women things, so gardening, household, and she's like, no, I'm going to write about politics, I'm going to write about some other things that are germane to the entire society. 1892, she had 3 friends who were lynched. They were store owners or worked at this, 2 of them were store owners and 1 of them worked at the store. But bottom line is, a racist white guy who had a store across the way was mad at the success of the black men, allowed one incident with some boys to escalate to a fight with men, and then eventually the white men got their guns, went to the People's Grocery, which is the name of the store. Black men defended themselves. One person was shot, so they rounded up several black men and put them in jail. Bottom line, a couple of days later, they went and got these 3 men, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart. Ida was so close to Tommy, she was godmother to his child. And best friends with his wife as well. So she was out of town when it happened. When she got back, she was like, she read the articles, and it was pretty much like these thugs, you know, had a conspiracy to kill white people and brought shotguns. And she was like, wait a minute, like these are my boys. These are upstanding men in the community. So if I'm reading this article about them and it's just blatantly full of lies, what about all these other lynchings that have happened? So that was her kind of turning point in becoming the anti-lynching crusader. She was always about justice. Another thing happened 1884 on a rail car, which happened a couple of times, but the most noteworthy one, she was asked to, it was a ladies' car, which was the equivalent of first class. And Ida was a very distinguished woman, elegant, and, you know, liked to dress. So, you know, had a nice dress, was asked to go to the smoking car. She's like, no, I'm a lady. I've got a ladies' car ticket, so I'm going to stay right here. So the conductor, you know, tried to remove her, put his hand on her, and she bit him, drew blood. And, right, so he had to go get 2 other men. So it took 3 men to forcibly remove her from the train. When that happened, the other passengers cheered. And she's like, And so what amazes me about Ida is that she always made the problems bigger than herself. So she's like, okay, I'm not going to go fight the conductor again. I'm going to sue the railroad. So a black woman in 1884 sued the Chesapeake Railroad and won $500. So the ultimate outcome is that 3 years later, 2.5 years later, that decision was reversed. Instead of winning $500, she had to pay $200. So again, just things that added fuel to her fire for you know, having and serving justice. So a couple other things that she did, again, moved to Chicago. She came to Chicago for the fair in 1893 to protest about no blacks being part of the World's Fair. That's how she met Ferdinand Barnett, her husband, somewhat through Frederick Douglass. And then moved to Chicago, again, got married in 1895, had a couple of kids. She traveled with her son, and Ferdinand was a big supporter of her. So he actually paid for a nanny or an assistant for her, and would sometimes keep the kids. So he was ahead of his time as well. But she met with President McKinley in 1898, she and some of her colleagues, to talk about making lynching a federal crime, which, the short story on that is he didn't do it 3 times in the 20th century. Anti-lynching legislation was put through Congress, and it didn't go through. I spoke in 2005 at Congress. They issued an apology for never passing any anti-lynching legislation. It still took almost another 20 years, which was signed in 2022. They finally signed anti-lynching legislation to make lynching a federal crime. So, yeah, it's significant. Going real quick, going back to Ida, is she did a number of other things. Founded the National Association of Colored Women, was one of the founding members of the NAACP, did the Negro Fellowship League. Again, she was instrumental in helping people migrate from the South to Chicago. And she put her money where her mouth is, and her efforts where her mouth is, that she didn't just say, come and move, she helped them. So she worked with churches and other organizations to help people during that transition. She saw that black men really needed a safe haven, if you will. And so she created the Negro Fellowship League. So giving effort and a voice to others that wouldn't normally have it. A couple other things that she did is, and how much? Got 2 minutes? 1 minute, okay. So I'll wrap it up here. So she ran for political office, didn't get it. She was uncompromising, right? And to be in politics, politics is designed for compromise, so she would not do well at that. But just really happy that everybody's out here tonight. Whenever I do a speech, I always ask for a call to action, which is thank you all for coming, a sincere thank you all for coming. But additionally, is get somebody else to do something. Again, voting, it's ridiculous some of the things that we're still fighting for, that Ida was fighting for. So voting rights, reproductive rights for women. So get out. You know, I'm preaching to the choir here, but not just you go out, influence somebody else. Do like Ida did, influence other people to do the right thing. So once again, I'm Dan Duster. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate you. We've got the next speaker coming up.
My name is Tom Ginsberg. I'm a professor of law here at the University of Chicago and the faculty director of the Forum on Free Inquiry and Expression. It's just really thrilling to have the honor to make these introductions of this panel. Some years ago, I came across a fantastic book. Many of you may know it, Ida, A Sword Among the Lions, Ida B. Wells and the Campaign Against Lynching. And I never thought I'd be able to meet the author, and so I'm so excited that we here at the university have been honored, really, with the presence of Paula Giddings. Most recently, the Elizabeth A. Woodson, 1922 Professor of Africana Studies at Smith College. Her first book was published in 1984, When and Where I Enter, The Impact of Black Women. The Impact of Black Women on Race and Sex in America. And it's just, you know, looking back, thinking just what a groundbreaking study that was, introducing the relationship between racism and sexism into academic discourse. And of course, we continue to confront those powerful forces and look back to Paula to helping identify them for us. Ida, A Sword Among Lions, won too many awards for me to list. It was that's right, it was a finalist for the National Book Award, named a best book by both the Washington Post and the Chicago Tribune. She's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a pioneering historian. And so join me in welcoming Paula Giddings. And she'll be interviewed tonight in conversation with our own Adam Green, who is a professor in the departments of Race, Diaspora, and Indigeneity, as well as the History Department, and has been here at the university since 2007. He's the author of Selling the Race, Culture, and Community in Black Chicago, 1940 to 1955, and is currently working on multiple projects, including the Black Struggle for Happiness. He is the winner of a Quantrell Award for Teaching Excellence here at the university, and was on the City of Chicago's Monuments Commission, the Advisory Committee on Monuments and Memorials. I'm really thrilled to welcome you both here, and with that, I'll turn it over to Adam.
Thank you so much, Tom, for those kind introductions. What we're going to do is start with some overview remarks, kind of introducing us in deep detail, I think, in relation to so much that comes out of your incredibly rich biography of Ida B. Wells. Paula's going to speak for a few minutes, then we're going to have a conversation about 20 minutes based on some questions and exchange, and then open up for about 10 or 15 minutes of questions and conversation with all of you here tonight. Thanks very much, and really, really looking forward to the opportunity for this conversation. So perhaps I'll invite you to go ahead.
Adam sent me some just discussion questions that we've been thinking about. And
Give her the mic.
He knows, oh, he knows this book. Here's the mic. We have a mic here.
straight. I know that at the soundboard.
I won't tell you where the mic was. Let me start all over again. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you. It's good to see you, and I'm thrilled to be here at the University of Chicago, and I'm thrilled to be with Adam. We've had some wonderful already. We've just passed some notes back and forth. I wanted to start with my favorite research finding when I was researching the biography of Ida B. Wells. And it concerns, I had to go to the Freedom of Information Act and get some material there. It took me a couple of years to get it, and I'll tell you what it is in a minute. The context for it is something called, and I thought about this as appropriate to the forum and to the tradition of the University of Chicago around freedom of expression. The context is the Espionage Act of 1917. Ida gets entangled with it, something, maybe the only thing she has in common with Donald Trump. And it's a very, I think it's a very important story. The Espionage Act, just very quickly, is passed in 1917. Woodrow Wilson is president. He's responsible. That's why I love this idea of Ida Wells' school taking the substituting for Woodrow Wilson, who was one of the most racist president that we've had. And he is also responsible for the modern surveillance and intelligence apparatus, political intelligence apparatus in the U.S. Wells, at this point, was involved with one of the most heinous situations that I think in our history, and this was around the idea of the 24th Infantry, black infantry, an infantry that was close to the heart of many black Americans. It was situated in Houston in 1917, harassed by Houstonians, by white Houstonians, threatened. A series of incidents really begins when white policemen arrest and beat up a black woman in Houston, and black soldiers intervene. And then a series of incidents sort of derive from that, to the point where the soldiers felt that they were going to be absolutely threatened and overrun by the white police. And 100 soldiers take up arms and go and attack the police station in Houston. A number of whites were killed. 4 soldiers were killed. I think about 15 whites were killed, including some authorities. 2 black civilians were killed. The men were court-martialed, had no chance to really defend themselves. They were immediately sentenced to hang by the army. Some gallows were quickly built outside of Houston. 13 of the first 65 who were tried were hung. And it was just an awful, you can imagine, situation. Ida Wells was outraged by the treatment of the soldiers, who didn't have a chance to even express or defend themselves. And she went to all the churches, which she had traditionally in Chicago, to mobilize and protest, and none of them would let her come. And there are a couple of reasons for it. Of course, people are afraid of the Espionage Act, which talked about inciting mutiny and which carried a 26-year prison sentence. But also, there was something that, and I hope, Adam and I hope we'll talk about this a little bit more, but there was also something else. There's always been a tension, especially in our community, around what is the path to citizenship, first-class citizenship? Is it accommodation and respectability, or is it protest? Ida, which very early on in her career, really creates almost the ideology of black movement kind of protest against almost all the elites who had the other point of view. But this, certainly we see it very clearly in the Reconstruction period, but it's also reflected in the war. What should we do? Shall we be patriots and loyal, fight for the country? Famously, even Du Bois famously had a close ranks editorial that says, let's put our special grievances aside and close ranks for this war. There was hope that if we showed our loyalty and if men showed their manhood, that things would be better after the war. Ida, of course, had a completely different view. In any case, she couldn't get the churches to support her, so she got an idea of making up some buttons. It talked about the martyred soldiers. And she distributed the buttons. The newspapers found out about the buttons, and guess what? The intelligence services found out about the buttons. And I'm going to end with this. Let me just read briefly how she talks about that meeting in her autobiography. And also I'm going to tell you what I found in the Freedom of Information Act around this issue. Predictably, Ida was soon visited by two intelligence officers who warned her that if she continued to distribute the buttons, she'd be arrested. On what charge? Ida demanded. Treason, riposted the smaller of the two men. She was not guilty of treason, she said, but if you think I am, you know your duty. Somewhat taken aback, the agents then said that they were going to confiscate the buttons because they were critical of the government. The government deserved to be criticized, Ida told them, for hanging soldiers as if they were criminals. When reminded that few took the stand that she did, she said that she'd rather go down, quote, in history as one lone Negro who dared tell the government that it had done a dastardly thing than save her neck by being quiet. It would be an honor, she added, to go to prison under such circumstances. The intelligence file describing the same meeting, this is the file that I received in meeting, indicates that the account written in her autobiography was, if anything, understated. Although much of the report is smudged and hardly legible, the agent's description of Ida going, quote, into a great deal of detail concerning her protest, this is what the intelligence said, about the soldiers being hung without the benefit of an appeal to the president. The report continued to say that she would not promise to stop distributing the buttons and that she would consult a lawyer about her next course of action. Happily, Ferdinand, her husband, was a lawyer, so. Although it was hard to make out the full text, the words, quote, she would die for if she had to, can be discerned. Unable to get Ida to comply, one of the agents in the case, Frank Clark, instead warned the manufacturer of the buttons, they gave up on her, to not accept more orders nor distribute those that remained. The intelligence report was at least the third that concerned the Barnett family. Ida's East St. Louis massacre pamphlet, and if you ever read that, this was such a stunning investigative journalism work she did on the East St. Louis riot, was also on file, appended by a note that said it was being used, quote, to stir up a great deal of interracial antagonism, end quote. Additionally, soon after Ferdinand's, as her husband, arm yourself speech, Ferdinand, who was sort of that quiet type radical and a great supporter of Ida, after East St. Louis, you know, in the East St. Louis riot, they had taken guns away from black people and then overran them. A Jewish observer, a contemporary observer, called it a pogrom himself of what happened in East St. Louis. Ferdinand in Chicago stands up and makes a speech and says, don't you all give up your guns, because it's coming here, which it did, of course, 2 years later in Chicago. Additionally, soon after Ferdinand's Arm Yourself speech, a report to the Chief of Bureau of Investigation, probably aware of his German constituency, as a state's attorney general, Ferdinand had a lot of engagements with German immigrants and knew German, but that made him suspect. The dossier went on to note that Illinois law allowed any number of firearms and ammunition in one's residence, and that, quote, this is the dossier, several thousand Negroes are believed to have bought rifles from department stores after Ferdinand's speech, and that most of the large black population in Chicago was armed. Men like Barnett, the report grimly concluded, can very easily cause a good deal of trouble if they are not careful. Later, of course, and I will end with this, my favorite part of the dossier is on the Barnetts and on Ida, was one that said that they were also, of course, following Marcus Garvey. And one of them said both Marcus Garvey and Ida are race agitators, but Ida is the most dangerous of the two.
So I knew I was in trouble if I was going to try to come up with questions and follow all the Giddings. And now I'm following B. Wells in terms of that extraordinary pronouncement. And one of the things that it brings to mind, and maybe we can start here, is that you spoke about the dichotomy in terms of seeking a path forward. Could be to citizenship, but in a certain sense also it's a path towards being able to flourish and defend your community. And protest is one way to think about the pole, but the other way to think about the pole is actually self-defense in terms of thinking about the story that you shared. And in that sense, indeed, Ida B. Wells is kindred to Marcus Garvey, kindred to Malcolm X, kindred to the Panthers, including all of the women Panthers who were involved with thinking about the importance of self-defense. At a later point in the conversation, I really want to get into that idea that the foundational right, the foundational right that needs to be defended is not necessarily freedom of expression, but the right to your body, the right to your person, the right to security, because in many ways I think that's what Wells embodied. Just to get a sense, though, of how deep and how long this runs in terms of Ida B. Wells' life, I think of her in that tradition of a race man or race woman, but with consequence. Like, she was someone who always defended the race, often alone and in the lead. So the Springfield riot in 1906, the Atlanta riot in 1905. As you say, the sort of cases both of the troops in Houston and the troops in Brownsville for 10 years. The East St. Louis riot in 1917. The race riot in Chicago in 1919 that Natalie Moore, who will be speaking later, so eloquently interspersed Ida B. Wells' testimony to. And all of the individual lynchings that are happening in the 1890s, 1900s, and beyond oftentimes, and it's just so powerful coming out of your book, she's the first one to speak. She's the first one to raise public awareness that this has happened. And I wondered if I could just ask you to comment on, as you reflect on it, where that came from, of believing not only that she should exercise her voice in this way, but she should exercise it in defense of black people in need of defending, consistently and almost without fail in terms of cases coming up.
You know, as a biographer, you can't help but be an armchair psychiatrist too, at some point. And we know that Ida was orphaned, as Dan talked about, at an early age. And there are a number of psychological profiles of leaders who've been orphaned. It was very interesting characteristics, and she shares some of them. But I think a part of it is she herself, she begins at some point to so identify with black people. She's always seeking some kind of, you see it even in her when she's dating, and when she's always trying to find some protection for herself. Someone who is strong enough to protect her. And she tests out, I feel sorry for some of the guys who were dating her. She was rough, you know, because she would test them.
And she wrote about it too.
And she wrote about it. It was great. You know, it's in her diaries, thank goodness. And at some point, she almost becomes the race. She wants to be protected, and she wants to protect the race. One of the most extraordinary quotes, of course, is in her autobiography when she loses in the state Supreme Court the train case. You know, the case where she refuses to leave a first-class ladies' car. And she wins this case in the lower courts, but then loses it in the state, it's overturned in the state Supreme Court. And the quote is, she says, I felt like I wanted to put the race in my arms, a certain race in my arms, and fly away with them. Because she knew that this was the beginning, that they weren't going to be protected by the law anymore. And so she has this sense of protecting the race and needing and understanding it from a very personal point of view.
And the way that she does that, she fights on so many different modes. She was a great advocate of thinking about the power of elocution, of oration, of performance. She, you know, sort of styled herself to be a thespian performer in Memphis as a young woman.
Yeah, she loved to act.
She
played Lady Macbeth.
Exactly. She wanted to be a novelist and honed a tremendous capacity as a journalist. But I was also thinking about that in terms of the FBI report, you know, revealing even more kind of fire and iron inside of her in that encounter than she herself recounted. The Chesapeake suit, as I remember it, she was dragged kicking and screaming, well, kicking, I shouldn't say screaming, kicking from the car and drew blood on the conductor who was actually trying to take her off the train. And that makes me want to ask about respectability in relation to Ida B. Wells. Because on the one hand, she was someone who wanted to style herself as a rising woman, as a woman of many talents, as somebody who could lead intellectually, as well as politically and publicly in terms of the community. But she recognized that the fight meant that you had to get yourself dirty at certain points. And you had to recognize that people would fight back at you by trying to smear you and discredit you and isolate you at a point where not just the general public, but the black community more generally might say, you know, you're just a little bit too far out there. And I'm just wondering what your reflections are on thinking about Wells as a person, a woman, but a person, who both saw the power of styling oneself in a way that corresponded to some of the cues of respectability, but knowing that respectability, like the law, would never defend you.
Ida Wells dressed to the nines. Very concerned about her appearance, and has wonderful, you have to love her because, you know, she's so bigger in life and so much courage in so many ways. But in her diary, she is upset with herself because she couldn't help but to buy a coat that she couldn't afford. She was a school teacher. She didn't have any money. She was in debt all the time. And a lot of it was because of her clothes, and she was very, very self-conscious. Sometimes we don't take into account that black people were emancipated and in the late 19th century in the Victorian period. So we're dealing with a whole bunch of gender confusion as well as race. And character and lady, being a lady, is destiny. If you're not considered a lady, and this is part of also having protection. If you're a lady, you deserve the resources of the state. You deserve men to protect you. You deserve a certain kind of dignity, etc. If you are outside of that category, you know what happens. You know what you're considered, and you know how vulnerable women can be. So she has that idea, but this is what she finally, I think, figures out: that respectability has its place, but it's not an agent of change. It's not going to now what respectability will give you is certain social privileges, but it's not an agent of change. One of the important things that she does is to help black people understand that you don't have to earn your first-class citizenship through respectability. It's natural rights. That's who you have the right to do it, and you better fight to keep it. Yeah. And so this is so I love the story of the train because it's her complexity. You know, there's actually I actually found the actual transcript of the court case, and it describes her. She comes to court in a parasol, white long gloves, long dress, a hat. And the conductor, who looks at her, and he says, you know, she looks like a lady now. He said, but she bit me and I bled freely. You know, that's all in the, what's interesting is that, and there's a long story, or there's a lot of this to say about, some of the greatest challenges of segregation really begin with women challenging their place on public transportation. We can go through the generations with that. And a lot of that has to do with, but this was the first-class ladies' car. And this was a period when race is still fluid. Sometimes you could stay in the car, and sometimes if you're a black woman, and sometimes you wouldn't be able to. Things were just, and so she does this. She is like Rosa Parks. She understands this is not just an individual act. She understands this is a civil rights act. And when she wins the court case in the lower court, by then there was a northern judge in the circuit. She is actually legally now known as a lady. And this was very important.
Let's talk about that, because we were having this conversation before we came in about sort of parallels between then, late 19th century going into the 20th century, and now, in terms of thinking about many of the same currents that are stirring up not only reactionary but fascist elements in terms of our current public situation. And one of the things that always really powerfully impacted me about what Wells did and what she was taking on was that the world that she was working in, world where, there seemed to be some opportunities open in relation to race, and things were changing month by month, week by week, sometimes daily. was the power of misinformation, to be able to cut ground from underneath black folk as they were trying to build on things that they'd built up: churches, businesses, associations, ideas of the fact that they deserve first-class citizenship according to guarantees from the Constitution. And, you know, I think the whole story about how Wells begins to analyze lynching, analyze racial violence, is a struggle also against the power of misinformation to undergird racial supremacy, undergird the oppression of people within society. How, as a journalist, was she understanding and then trying to advocate for truth against lies systematically as a way of putting black people in a situation where they couldn't protect themselves?
There are so many similarities to that period when she's emerging as a journalist and now. One of the things that was going on then is now is a technological revolution.
Right, right.
And so now newspapers, now information, and also newspapers can be distributed nationally for the first time. This was also a golden age of the black press. 200 newspapers being published every week in the 1880s and 90s, if you can imagine. They could pick up each other's articles, and so they knew one knew what the other was doing from, you know, New York to California. But also transmitted nationally was all of these lies that Wells talks about, of the idea of black men raping, that somehow, suddenly, there's this just new, they called it the new crime of black men raping white women. And Wells will really begin to analyze that. I think one of the things that happens, maybe too, is that, which we didn't talk about, was that there was a number of things that happened. Maybe I should explain very, very quickly. When Wells's parents were dying, a white doctor tended to her father. He was a part of a group. It was interesting. There was white organizations that would come to cities that were having pandemics, and Holly Springs was having yellow fever pandemic. So a doctor came and was attending to her father. And on his dying bed, he gave the doctor savings to give to Ida. He knew he was going to die. So the doctor takes it, and he tells Ida he has money for her. And they meet, mistakenly, it was her mistake, really, to meet in a public place. And someone sees an exchange of money of a white man and a 16-year-old, Ida, who has already said to people, I want to live by myself with my siblings. I don't want to be under the supervision of all of you, all the friends of the family. So then a rumor begins about her sexual impropriety, and that is why she really wanted to be alone with the children. Victorian period. This rumor stays with her throughout her adulthood. It is quite incredible that she has to face it. So she's already, Adam, she already understands how you can be lied upon about these things, and that they're not the truth. And just to say this, that this idea that she explores, this is what makes her, she's an investigative journalist. The other journalists aren't investigative journalists. Ida's going to the scenes of these lynchings. She's interviewing people. You know, sometimes she even sends other agencies, investigative agencies, to investigate what's going on.
She used that data from the Chicago Tribune to prove
that cases
that's right. Don't even involve a charge, much less the capacity to convict on a crime of rape.
One of the first to use something which was just emerging, something new called statistics. She uses it as a part of her argument.
Yeah. So you would think, and I mean, I think now when we look at Ida B. Wells from our vantage point in 2024, that all of the paths that she broke open, or all the barriers she broke open, the ways in which she was maybe the first intersectionalist, something I'm sure that will be talked about later on, the ways in which she's able to use statistics and use social analysis through investigation.
She understands sociology, too.
And sociology.
Modern sociology is emerging at this period.
Someone like that, presumably, would be embraced. You know, Du Bois, for instance, was a state-of-the-art social scientist also in other ways, and he had his difficulties, but he was acclaimed and celebrated throughout the black community and elsewhere. But Wells's experience, and I think your book kind of presents this so powerfully, is that she's not only embattled by the increasing racism and the ferocity of applying that racism by the white society in the South and increasingly also in the North. She's also isolated within black communities. She's isolated within first wave feminist communities around temperance, around suffrage. All the time, people are looking at Ida B. Wells in part because she's this implacable force of telling the truth and saying that she's too inconvenient to be partnered with.
Yes.
And I want us to be sure to talk about...
Truth happens.
Yeah.
Like that. That's what happens with the truth. It's very inconvenient.
Maybe to make sure that we have time to talk about it, I want to bring it back to this idea of freedom of thought and freedom of speech.
Okay.
Because we're celebrating her for embodying that, and she absolutely does do that. But I have the sense that it's very important to reckon with the ways in which Wells was not protected, even though she was powerful. And because she was not protected, she couldn't enjoy a livelihood despite her unique, singular talents. Because she was not protected, the government could threaten her, judges in Memphis could threaten her, fellow sort of people in the NAACP could threaten her and move her off of the board of directors. And I think it's something for us to reflect on now, that we celebrate people who embody this idea of freedom of thought, but we need to recognize that when you don't have protections, and she did not have protections in terms of her rights, you do that work, but you don't enjoy the fruit of that work, either in relation to security for self, livelihood for self, and the proper place that you should have in terms of leadership. So how should we think about her case in terms of telling us what it means to celebrate a person, but also recognize the need to protect the radicals, the truth tellers, the inconvenient voices today in ways that make sure that we're doing that work and sustaining those people?
You know, I was at Columbia University for that unveiling of the bust, and one of the panels was Nicole Hannah-Jones and Kimberly Crenshaw.
Wow.
And this was a question about, they were asked about, who is protecting you? How are you doing through all of this? And they admitted that it's really taking a toll, and for the same reason. It's, you know, you can deal with your enemies, please. But when the problem comes from within the group that you're working on behalf of, and people not protecting you, and people taking the side of others, this can be very, very difficult. So one of the lessons, Ida gives many, and you're great, that's great that you bring this up, Adam. She offers many lessons, and this is one of the lessons. Please let us protect those people, and particularly, not only, but particularly women, because they're really going to be confronted not just by racial issues, right, but by the intersection of racial and gender issues as well. And they're always very vulnerable to what Ida was. People thinking about their reputations and thinking about this and that and how they look and blah, 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 blah. So it's very important that we understand that aspect but also understand this. When you look at all of the people in Ida's generation, you know, because she stuck to her guns, not everybody did. And some people weren't able to for all kinds of pressures and reasons. But she never compromised. And that gives a kind of satisfaction to me. At the end of her life, I think she was, you know, so many of her compatriots, Monroe Trotter probably committed suicide, T. Thomas Fortune was an alcoholic, and just, but she was pretty stalwart. And I was very moved when, you know, she made plans for her funeral. And she wanted the song sung. Many of you probably know it. She said, I want them to sing, I've done my work, at the end of her life. And when you think about it, isn't that something to be able to say that?
Absolutely.
Of everything, I've done my work.
Absolutely. And with that, we're going to open it up now for questions, and I believe that there are microphones that are being brought up on either aisle, so if you have a question, please raise your hand, and we can direct someone over to be able to bring a mic there. So we have one down here, please. Thank you. If you can introduce yourself, please.
I'm Lakeisha Gray Sewell, the founder of Girls Like Me Project here in Chicago. We take our girls every year to Ida B. Wells' home and to her statue. Her praxis, the people must know before they can act, and there's no educator to compare with the press, is the center of our work. But I want to ask a question more about what you just left off with, her last days, her health, and being unprotected. We know she died of kidney failure, which kidney harbors a lot of anger, fear, right? In her diaries, did she talk about any of those type of issues? Did she talk about just feeling resentful or just feeling alone, unprotected, as you talked about? And I'm raising that question because, as you said, so many of us who walk in Ida's footsteps feel that as well, right? You feel unprotected, respectability, and all these other things. And just the awareness to everybody of how important it is that someone does feel protected and that it can lead to other health issues. So that's the question.
Thank you. One thing is that she, and I don't know if this is necessarily good all the time, but she kept on going. Whenever there was a problem, and she said in her autobiography that certain disappointments and all, it affected her physically. You know, when she lost the Negro Fellowship League in Chicago, she became ill. She was hospitalized for a while, and I think there was a connection there. But as soon as she got out of the hospital, she started something else. You know, she ran for a state Senate seat, and she lost. And she's lost, and then she went right and started a new independent party. She lost her newspaper sometime before, Chicago newspaper that came out of the Fellowship League, because and in the middle of the Depression, she says, I'm going to start a new one. I think people really want to, you know. And I've never got any sense of her feeling sorry for herself. She was on a mission, you know. And that's sort of, she didn't sort of look to the left or to the right. This is what she was supposed to do, and I thought it, and this is how I ended my book. And she starts writing this autobiography because she knows if she doesn't write it, she's not going to be held high in history because all of her friends were supposed allies weren't going to say very much about her. And you know, she died in mid-sentence. She was writing it when she finally became unconscious. So that was who she was, you know. But I think everybody has to deal with it individually as well with those kinds of pressures. The one thing I would say, and she did have, you know, not famous allies, but she had allies. You can't do it by yourself. You have to have people around you. You have to have a trusted circle around you. You can't be isolated. You know. She divided a whole suffrage organizations, right? She did Alpha Suffrage Club. She created a fellowship league. You know, she started a black kindergarten. So yeah, but that's it. But you have to weigh, don't you? You have to weigh your work and your well-being.
Thank you.
I believe that there's a question, I thought up there, and then
Right
there's
here.
one down here as well.
I'm right here. Professor Giddings, thank you for your full body of work. I'm Lakeisha Harris.
I can't see, where are you?
Right here. The chocolate sister in the blue.
Okay. Oh, I see, okay.
I'm Lakeisha Harris. I'm the executive director of Chicago Volunteer Doulas. And at this time where we're seeing a lot of Black maternal health issues, we know that
Maternal health, yes.
yeah, we know that Mother Ida B. Wells was a mother who really poured into her children, her family legacy. We heard Dan speak to that. But there is a cost of being a sister outsider, as Audre Lorde said. You know, a cost of not having the economics that she should have had paid to her. We are giving her her flowers right now, but I'm wondering, how do we reconcile the penalty of being a sister outsider and doing that work and being the truth teller with what we deserve? We deserve the protection. We deserve all of the things that comes with doing this work. And it is a hefty, hefty lift to do this work. How do we reconcile that in our own self?
Well, let me think if I understand your question, how Wells reconciled things, or tried to. Well, I'm not going to talk about myself tonight. Listen, I don't feel I'm in the same category, because I write about activists. I'm not out in the street. I have, we all have our issues, but let me talk about Wells. When she had children at a time when you certainly weren't supposed to be an activist and have children at the same time. You weren't supposed to leave the house, right? And she tried to stay home. But then she figured out, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my children with me wherever I go. So when she's asked from Republicans in Illinois to stump for William McKinley around the state of Illinois, she had a nursing baby, her first child. And she said, I'll do it if you provide a nurse in all of those places who can hold my baby while I give the speech. And that's what she did. She would take her children to, when she was, she was one of the co-founders of the National Association of Colored Women, the first national black women's organization. And she comes triumphantly to the organizational meeting, first meeting in Washington with her child, and a nurse. And there's a wonderful scene where, because Harriet Tubman was at that meeting as well. And at the end of the meeting, Harriet Tubman raises that child up and says, "This is the child of the Federation." Ida Wells takes her children to the site when she's investigating lynchings. I mean, she doesn't, she puts them somewhere and she does investigating. So for her, there was never a problem that couldn't be solved.
I think we have time for one more question. Up here in the front, please.
Hello?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello?
Yes,
I'm Trent.
get up.
Hi, on a very lighter note, I wonder about some other people contemporary to Wells. Sometimes I think about Madam C.J. Walker. I think about Du Bois and Douglas, but I think she knew them. Did she know Madam C.J. Walker?
She loved Madam C.J. Walker. She thought that she was such an extraordinary figure because Ida liked self-made people, and people who sort of come up. And she meets Madam Walker, and Madam Walker is what we don't always hear much about, is also a tremendous activist. And she helps a lot of people, a lot of causes. She gives money to the NAACP. She gives money to a lot of the independent organizations, black organizations. And she actually even worked with, she and Wells Ida were actually chosen after World War I to go to Versailles by Marcus Garvey's organization for them to go together. It didn't work out for all kinds of reasons. But she liked Madam C.J. Walker, and they had a relationship.
Before we stop, I've been thinking about this since you answered the first question, and I think I just want to put it out there because it seems germane to questions that a lot of people are asking. How do you take care of yourself? How do you practice self-care? How do you find ways to fortify yourself when people aren't supporting you? And one of the things, again, that I felt like I learned in such a profound way from your book was that Wells was the first of many things. But I think in some ways she was one of the first African Americans publicly as a leader to make a habit of calling out other prominent African Americans who she felt were falling short. Oftentimes in terms of speaking out against specific lynchings or addressing particular laws, and then she would turn over to white reformers, particularly first-wave feminists, and say this is the suffrage movement's commitment to trying to bring in Southern white women and disenfranchise black women. And I think that practice of calling out, I just want to ask you to speak to, because she did it in a particular way. She would call people out and she would say, "You're falling short," all the way up to, for instance, Du Bois. But she would also say, "How could you make it right?" And I think there's a lesson in that I would propose for all of us too. It doesn't feel good sometimes to be called out and told that you're coming short, but when someone tells you how to make it right, responding positively to that is a way to support those truth tellers in their work. And I wonder if maybe by closing you could say something about that in Wells.
One reason why Wells, I think, captures our imagination even up to this day is because she really believed, it sounds so corny, in telling the truth. No matter what, and she said, even one time she said, even if the heavens might fall when I tell the truth. And they did, but she was ready for it. And she understood that the leadership had become less independent by the 20th century. And that people were, as Adam says, falling short and compromising. and not doing what they had to do, and not bringing in also, one of the things that she criticized, she did not think just because you were an elite that you should bleed. And one of the things she criticized, and this was true of the NAACP and many of the newer organizations, is that they did not take the working class into consideration, and certainly did not use them in a movement. You know, one time she said that when she's talking about, she's the first one that really begins to talk about civil disobedience in the modern era. You know, she says, look, the South requires Northern money and black labor. If black labor refused to work, she said, lynching would stop if this is how we could do it, if you could have some unity. But she wanted the laboring class, what she then called the laboring classes, to be a part of this. And she would always fall out. One of the things that she would fall out and call out people is sometimes there was an important incident, a lynching, in which the NAACP would go down there, and Ida would go down there with her independent organization. The NAACP is trying to get money from white people and press and everything. And Ida is mobilizing the community. It's kind of like Ella Baker versus Martin Luther King, of where Ida is empowering the community. And when people didn't do that, she became, and she would call them out. But this is one of the problems she also had in the end, because she just did not. But she would call herself out though. She felt she wasn't doing what she was supposed to do. So she was a tough cookie. But you could always trust her because she called it as she saw it.
Please join me in thanking Paula Giddens.
Thank you, and Adam, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tracy Matthews. I'm the Executive Director at the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. Can I have one fangirl moment? Paula Giddens is one of my sheroes. She's one of the people who's responsible for me becoming a historian. Her book, When and Where I Enter, The Impact of Black Women on Race and Sex in America, was so important and foundational to the field of black women and black feminist studies. So, and she's obviously a wonderful storyteller. So I just want to give her another round and thank her for being here with us tonight. What a coup that we were able to get her, Tom. Thanks so much for inviting her. So I have the privilege to introduce the next panel. And these are a group of powerful black women who are, through their actions, through their work, embodiments of the legacy of Ida B. Wells that we're celebrating tonight. They're journalists, activists, writers, organizers, and I'm going to introduce all of them, and I think they will. Are you going to come out now or after I introduce you? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to introduce them, and they can come out when they get good and ready. So the first person that I'd like to introduce is Anwulika Anigbo, who's the Development Director at the Invisible Institute. She's devoted her career to developing a fundraising style rooted in black queer feminist principles, critical race theory, and Eleanor Ostrom's paradigm-shifting work around the viability of the commons. Please join me in welcoming Anwulika. Next, I want to welcome to the stage Morgan Elise Johnson from The Tribe. Morgan's purpose is to make and protect Black history so that future generations will know who we are. She's a filmmaker and a visionary. Welcome, Morgan. Aislinn Pulley is the co-executive director of the Chicago Torture Justice Center, which was founded out of the historic 2015 reparations ordinance for survivors of Chicago police torture. Aislinn is also the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Chicago. She was an organizer with We Charge Genocide, a founding member of Insight Arts, a cultural nonprofit that used arts for social change, and a member of the performance ensemble End of the Ladder. She's a founder of the Young Women's Performance Ensemble dedicated to ending sexual assault called Visibility Now, as well as a founder and creator of urban youth magazine Underground Philosophy. Welcome, Aislinn. And our moderator tonight is the one and only Natalie Moore, who is the Race, Class, and Communities editor at WBEZ. She's the author of several books, including The South Side and The Billboard, which is a play about abortion. Natalie writes a monthly column for the Chicago Sun-Times. Please join me in welcoming our entire panel.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Tracy, when she emailed me and said, do you want to be a part of an event with Paula Giddings and Ida B. Wells? And I wrote back in all caps, yes. So I want to spend some time talking about the legacy through Ida B. Wells' work, but also reflecting on some of the things we heard in the conversation with Paula and Adam. I was taking notes. I know Amalika was taking notes, and things resonating with us. But these were short bios, which is great because it leaves more time for conversation. But I would love for each of you to talk about the work that you do and how you see it in conversation or a part of the legacy of Ida B. Wells. I'll start with you since you are immediately to my left.
Okay, so my name is Amalika Anigbo. Again, I'm here representing the Invisible Institute, and we are a journalism production studio located close by. And essentially, we're an interdisciplinary group of neighbors who put our talents towards investigative journalism that coheres around the central principle that we have a co-responsibility with government to investigate human rights abuses and to demand redress. And so our work, while we're investigative journalists, we like to put out the story in the medium that best conveys the narrative. So we do put out long-form investigations, but we also have produced 2 podcasts, we've done exhibitions, and we're open to whatever form carries the narrative. I think our work also has some really important underlying principles. I'm just gonna name 3 of them. One of them, or I named one, which is that we have a co-responsibility with government. The second one is that there's certain knowledge that you can only get on the ground from knowing people and being in community. And that's why I said that we're an interdisciplinary group of neighbors. And sometimes when I talk to Jamie about it, who's our founder, we talk about neighborliness really depends on how you define your neighborhood, but we know how to be neighbors. The last one is that all knowledge is partial. And so we are writers, but we also, Jamie again sued the city to release, to make public police complaint records. And so one of our primary functions is also FOIAing for the records and then making them public on a website called cpdp.co. And later we'll talk about the work of Trina Reynolds-Tyler, who I think very deeply embodies the legacy of Ida B. Wells in the way in which she approaches that journalism and her reporting out of that journalism. So I'll stop there.
Morgan?
My name is Morgan Elise Johnson. I'm the co-founder and publisher of The Tribe. We are a Chicago publication with a specific mission to reshape the narrative of Black Chicago. So I would say that our work is in what we're now calling narrative change. We look at dominant narratives in society, dominant narratives in the news, and we say, how can we
deepen these conversations, and sometimes how can we disrupt this? How can we change the conversation? We were founded in 2017 in February, right around the time that Donald Trump was being inaugurated, and very much inspired by the movement for Black Lives. I would like to think that we are one of the many Black millennial organizations that sprung up during that time, of people who put aside, their artistry, their dreams, or whatever, and said, how can we answer to this call of what's going on in this country with viral Black death, and how can we put our talents towards doing something helpful and hopeful for our people? And I think that although when we started the tribe, we didn't quite know what this would mean for Black Chicago, but in 2020, during the uprisings, I think we really found our voice and our purpose, that we're here to uplift the organizers, give the most marginalized communities a platform, and amplify their voice. And so that's what we do.
I'm Aislinn with the Chicago Torture Justice Center, and I definitely am so appreciative of both Invisible Institute and the tribe, and in particular the tribe, while we've just seen, the corporatization of journalism and just the elimination of so many investigative outlets, which is also why Invisible Institute is so important with like Harith Augustus, his murder, and the investigation that you guys did. I think, the fact that Ida B. Wells would go to the lynching sites just struck me as something that we would do with Justice for Families, would go to the sites of the murders by CPD, and try to conduct independent investigations, try to save data, save news coverage, and then work with families. Justice for Families, myself and Krista Noel founded that when we were in We Charge Genocide. And then when We Charge sunsetted, BLM Shy was able to incubate it and hold it. And now it's kind of, finding its place at the Chicago Torture Justice Center. And that through line of just kind of, struck me, that independent or non-governmental, investigative impulse, is part of her legacy, to be able to save this data and then use the data to counter what now, in Chicago, the police narrative isn't always the only narrative that gets talked about in the news. And for decades, that was not the case. And I remember after a young man was killed in, I think it was 2017, by an Amtrak cop, and we were able to immediately go to the family. He was only in town on a layover. And he was coming from a wedding in like Mississippi and going home to Minnesota, and he was on a layover and the Amtrak cop killed him. And his family had to flee, to come here overnight, and we put them up and we were with them, and then he passed away. But we were able to put out based on our conversations with the people who were willing to talk to us, our narrative of what happened, which was that it was cold. And him and the other passengers who were on the layover wanted to go inside. And the Amtrak cop wouldn't let them stay and kicked them out, and then shot and killed him. And that countered the police narrative, and we were able to get that narrative on the news. And it actually, for the first time in I don't know how long, there was actually within 24 hours a charge brought forth. I mean, it was eventually, it didn't go anywhere, But that was, that we saw the power of, okay, we're not just doing this for nothing, right? So that's what really struck me. And then, the power of this, torture survivors refusing to be silent also struck me as connected to Ida B. Wells', commitment to truth. And, decades and decades of being denied the ability to tell their stories, didn't stop them from keeping on telling their stories, which eventually helped to topple the old guard in Chicago, which is aggressively fighting to come back into power, but at least at the present has been pushed back. And so I think there's so many connections.
Yeah, that narrative about the police, so reporters on breaking news, there's a shooting that happens, CPD puts out a press release, but there's a sophistication now, not just among journalists, but among the public that maybe that's not really what happened. Maybe something else happened. And I want to talk about objectivity or the lack thereof. Morgan, what the tribe does is, let's tell us your philosophy on objectivity before I wax about it myself.
Yeah, we're very unapologetically letting our audience know and all of Chicago media know that objectivity is not real. Like you approach your work through the lens of who you are, your education, who do you have access to. It's always been very clear to me because I wasn't taught in journalism school, so I come from film. And so when you're taught to be an auteur, you're taught pick your subject, focus the lens. And when you focus on one person, everybody else blurs out. And you've made a distinct choice that this is my subject and what I'm focusing on. And that is a bias. You can't tell everybody's story and everybody's point of view at the same time. It's impossible. So as journalists, I'm saying what is more useful and more honest is to tell the audience, here's the framework that we're gonna do this work. And the tribe is saying, unapologetically, we're here for Black people, we're here for Black liberation, you should read us with that in mind. And that's more honest than us pretending like we're objective. So it's just like, you know what you're getting. And sometimes we do the work of letting other people know that they're not objective. Like this journalist over here is connected to this, this, and that, and this person and this money, and that's the framework that they're coming from. So, yeah.
We're all subjective because we're all human beings.
Right.
With lived experiences, and that goes into the newsroom, and that's a good thing. Amalika, can you talk about the Missing Black Women and Girls Project that the Invisible Institute did?
Yes. Our most recent reporting, led by Trina Reynolds Tyler, our director of data, is on missing Black women in the city. So Black women make up 2/3 of all missing persons cases. And 1/3 of those cases are Black women and girls from the age of 10 to 20. But in spite of the fact that the 2020 census says that group makes up 2% of Chicago's population. And so one of the things that is really groundbreaking about this investigation is that Trina CPD says that 99.8% of missing cases are closed non-criminal, essentially that everything is fine. And Trina, born and raised on the south side of Chicago, said, I have some questions about this police data that we have. And so while we have this archive of data that I said, we make public, you can look it up on your phone right now, you'll see that complaints are categorized. And Trina said, I'm going to, she went to grad school, she worked with HR DAG, and she built a machine learning model and led a group of about 200 volunteers over a period of months to train this machine learning model to actually read the text of police complaints so that she could really understand what is happening in the text. So you might have a complaint that says improper search But in the text, the person filing the complaint says that the officer touches her inappropriately. So it was really a way of thinking about like how we have gender-based violence, the ways in which violence becomes covered up, and another way of thinking about data. So one of the things that's important to us is that data isn't just points, right? It can be seen as a human rights archive. So based on that, one of the first threads she followed was the missing persons investigations, because there are a lot of instances of police neglecting the families who are reporting their people missing. So one of the things is people are being told that they have to wait 24 to 48 hours, which is not true, and it is illegal to do that. And it has really huge consequences in a case like this. Also, record keeping is really bad. So key information is missing from investigations when investigations are happening. And so that full investigation, it was published in the Reader. It's also available on missinginchicago.com. You can also find it through our website, but I encourage all of you to look at it, because it really is the beginning of reimagining sort of what these new data tools can do, because as we get so much information, it becomes easier for data to lie to us. And that's why it's really important to have people who are connected to community and can say, I know, because there is a march for murdered and missing Black women that happens every year on the South Side. So if that is happening, how are 99.8% of cases closed non-criminal? So, you know, that's a little bit about that.
Around 2018, my timing is all off. It's like either it was before the pandemic or after the pandemic. But I was covering a story on a Sunday at Oakwood Cemetery, and there was a. So first of all, like all four of my grandparents are buried there. My best friend is buried there. Harold Washington. I mean, we know how important the cemetery is. I had no idea there was a Confederate monument there. And every year, these Confederate people cosplay and go do something there. And then there was a counter-protest that day of folks who were doing the walk to Ida B. Wells' grave, who is also in Oakwood. That was a really, really hard assignment. Because how do you interview someone who says that the Civil War was not about slavery? But it was, thinking about like, who do we honor? I mean, the Confederate monument is for people who were prisoners of war. So it's a mass grave. And thinking about who we honor, and since then we've seen Ida B. Wells be honored with the Richard Hunt monument on the former Ida B. Wells public housing development, the street named. But this is work that you do also, Aislinn, with the Chicago Torture Justice Memorial. And one of the things that has not been done, well, one, if you could talk about what you all have gotten that's unprecedented in the United States that I don't think enough people know about. If you could tick those things off and then talk about the missing thing that has not been done.
Yeah, so in Chicago on May 6, 2015, Chicago became the first city in the country to pass a reparations ordinance for survivors of police torture. And so that's one. And in that ordinance, what I didn't know at the time, I don't know if others knew, I think most of us did not know this, that the ordinance included some important things, very small monetary compensation for only 57 survivors of torture by John Burge, for whom legal recourse had already been exhausted,
It mandated the creation of a curriculum taught in all Chicago public schools, 8th and 10th grade social studies classes to teach about torture and CPD violence. It gave free access to these survivors to the city colleges, including their family members, including grandchildren. And it also mandated for the creation of a center located on the south side to treat the psychological impacts of torture. That then subverted what I later learned, and we later learned, was a federal restriction. There are about 16, 15 torture centers that exist in the country. They're all limited through their federal funding to treat only international torture survivors. So the ordinance was able to subvert that, and we became the first and currently only center in the country dedicated to domestic torture. And one of the only, we're trying to, do global search. Contexts are varied all over the world, but one of the only in the world, and we're looking at other countries. We did receive a visit from a psychiatrist in Gaza who runs a similar kind of center. Obviously, it's different because of the occupation and the indigeneity there, right? So that story is slightly different, but there's a limit in how many clinical modalities exist globally that are specifically are dedicated to treating state violence and torture. And then in addition to that, it mandated the creation of a memorial. And the memorial has not yet been built. After the ordinance was passed, Rahm Emanuel refused to talk to any of us. He only did it because he wanted to beat Chewy in the runoff. So it was. He also had the city council votes to do it, so it was in his best interest to support it. And there was an apology also.
There was an apology too, which was important for the historical record, that there was an acknowledgement that this in fact did happen and it was the responsibility of the city. And the memorial, now that Brandon is in the office, even though Lori campaigned and said she was going to support the building of it, she didn't. She refused to move on it. But now that Brandon's in office, we were able to secure funding, and we are really hopeful that we'll be able to break ground in the fall.
So a memorial has been selected because there was, people submitted. Can you talk about what it will look like, and has a location been determined?
Yes. So it will be on 55th and King Drive. Right now, there are like a bunch of empty lots over there, and we're going to be acquiring 3 of them. We went through the first phase of getting community support, and community voted on it. They voted to approve it. And now the next phase is it has to go through city council. And so that will take a few months probably. And so then we're hoping by the fall we can break ground.
So when Paula and Adam were here, they talked a little bit, and I think there was a question about, who's protected and how do we look at people decades later with the particular view that they might not have had when they were alive. Morgan, what is the cost of truth-telling?
Let me try to figure out where to start. One of the reasons why we started to really uplift the voice of the community organizer is because organizers in their time are never celebrated in the press. We look back at Martin Luther King, he was painted as an agitator. We talk about Ida B. Wells. She was unprotected as well. And we thought, what would it mean if we actually, instead of just going to the protest and looking for the clash between the protesters and the police, what if we actually just uplift the voices of the organizers? And so as we became the truth-telling publication in Chicago, mind you, I'm not even a writer, a journalist, I'm the publisher. All of a sudden, whatever I say on social media, it's like retweet, you know? It's blowing up into a big thing. And during the municipal elections last year, someone just tweeted me a picture of a noose and, you know, like tagged me in it, like an anonymous person. A lot of police blogs and stuff like that were following us, and we had to really sit and evaluate our whole operation and go, whoa, whoa, whoa. We didn't even know we were that powerful. I have a team of 10 people, 2 reporters, 1 editor. You know, we have a fraction of the budget of the Tribune and all these people. So all of a sudden it's just like, wow, we're really a threat just because we tell the truth and we uplift Black people, and it's like, this could be a threat to our lives, you know. Me and my co-founder, Tiffany, we're also best friends. We went to college together. We were starting to get mail to our homes, you know. So we had to go to our support systems, the people with the big names and the dollars, and say like, okay, wait a minute. How do we protect ourselves now? What can we do? You know, we had to start to, you know, we're getting doxxed. We have to start wiping our information from the internet, wiping our family's information from the internet. We have to like learn all these safety protocols and all this insurance and stuff like that that we didn't even know to have because we're just a scrappy group of Black people telling the truth. And nobody cared when we were just telling Black stories. But when it came to politics, when it was just like, oh, this can affect power shifting, it became like this is a life-threatening business that we're in. That's a part of the tradition of the Black liberatory press. You know, I go all the way back to the 1820s with a Black publisher named Alex Manley in North Carolina, who was threatened by a lynch mob. And it was like too much prosperity going on in North Carolina through the liberatory press. And the publisher, Alex Manley, wrote a rebuttal article about how Black men were being perceived as rapists. And his opinion piece was so powerful that an enraged lynch mob came after him, and he had to flee and never return, and they burnt down the publication and opened fire on the Black people there, and then took back electoral power illegally. All the Black people who had elected office were just removed. This is American history. That's what truth-telling does. So yeah, there's a huge cost to truth-telling, and I think about Ida B. Wells and what she means to us in terms of just operating in her legacy. It's everything. Like, we're so inspired for her to have that ancestral connection, but we also relate to her very deeply in the feeling of being very unprotected, to where we can watch the media landscape of Chicago be silent on Palestine. And me, who's not even a writer, I've only written 2 articles in the whole history of thetribe.com, and one of them is on Zionism. When I researched it and saw the word supremacy in the Zionist manifesto and said, what? Do Black people know about this? You know? So, and then as soon as I print it, then I'm getting calls from funders and saying, okay, we need to have a conversation, you know? It's a hard time to be a truth teller here now.
And when I think about, I had to get WBEZ to like delete me from the internet too, personal stuff. And I'm like, okay, I'm not Ida B. Like, I'm not even talking about lynching. But when Paul was talking about it can be your own people, that didn't, like, I'm used to the police blogs coming after me and blocking, but I had to remove myself from the internet after Black people made a video about me saying I need to be flogged. Because I wrote a column about let's not be mean to migrants. And that shook me more than the CWB blog or any of those other ones. Yeah, that was really, really
Yeah, and the
hard.
part about just holding our people accountable,
Yeah.
you know, I really want to know why Black people, why we're not.
And thank you, the tribe
going
actually
to the
retweeted
next
me and
level.
had my back on Twitter with that. But
Like,
it was-
why are we making it to the next phase? Like, who are the gatekeepers within our community that are working on behalf of power? Just to hold on to the little stuff that they got. Somebody has to be the truth teller and call that out. You know, that's the tradition of Ida B. Wells. Yeah.
Todd was like, could you please get to the Q&A and let the folks in? So it is now time for questions from the audience. If you don't have any questions, we can keep. We have one over here. And the mic will come to you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Shantier Anderson. I know we've talked a lot about the heaviness. I would like, if you're comfortable, if each of you can share, and that's our moderator too, because you're amazing. If each of you can share maybe like what has been maybe a top 2, top 3 most fulfilling moment, contribution for you when it comes to Chicago's community.
I can start that. I think for me, I think this goes a little bit to a question that was asked earlier about like Black maternal death rates and maternal health and just the general health of Black women as we go through the world. And one of the things that's really important to me is work and the nature of work and the ways in which I think, you know, under capitalism, we have a very unhealthy relationship with work, but work can be something that is really important and fulfilling. And I think that people want to work and have fulfilling work and do that in a way that enriches their lives and the lives of other people. And I think all my top things about where I work is the ability to really actively shift the nature of work and shift the ways in which a work environment holds you and the way that you can hold your work because you're held in your work environment. And I think especially as we do this work, one of the things that came up to me in this last question was a lot of times in Chicago, because of the way that Black people have to interact with the police, a lot of women lead their own investigations. That's what Somebody is about, is women are often leading their own investigations about the murders of their children, about the missingness of their children, without the institutional power. And it's so important as you approach these really difficult things to have a work environment that doesn't require a 9-to-5, a work day, that doesn't require you to come in if you can't come in, that doesn't require you to explain why you did not come in. And I think especially as we watched Trina do this investigation, and you know, if you ever get a chance to see her, she knows all the information like the back of her hand, but there were moments where I was like, this is good, this is hard. I can see how hard this is for her, and I'm so grateful that as a work environment, she can do whatever she needs to do. And I think that one of the things that we have to think about and push for is changing the nature of work, that we deserve work environments that trust that we want to work and that we want to do fulfilling work and create the conditions for us to do that. And my top moments are about the ways in which it feels to be in that space, to be in an office and to know that, yes, this is hard, but it is hard together. Yeah.
So I'll answer it maybe with not as heavy or as important, but I love that I can afford a home on the South Side that would cost triple. Now I may not gain wealth from it, so I got to invest my money elsewhere. But that I live in a bedroom community with a lot of space, and I had friends in town a few weeks ago. And we went to Black-owned art galleries, saw other Black art, and then at midnight, we could Grubhub Harold's and order gizzards with mild sauce. Like, that was just so joyful. And that's what you can do in Chicago.
I love that. Yeah, my work is also very joyful. I get to go into a newsroom production house space that like has been curated by me and my best friend. We get to decide what that culture is. We get to make it what it wasn't for us. You know, since we're in narrative change, you know, we think about, okay, what is the dominant narrative? It's white, it's patriarchal, it's Christian, you know. There's so many Black journalists who have to step into newsrooms and code switch and do all that stuff. And we get to tell the people who we hire, okay, take all of that off, you know? And that's so liberating, where it's just like, oh, we're the dominant topic here, you know? So that's what makes our work a lot of fun, yeah.
I'm going to answer this, but it's a weird, it's joy, but it's not joy in the sense that we've heard already. You know, Chicago used to lead the country in the killing of Black people by police, and that's no longer true. We've saved lives for the first time in years. And, you know, we started doing our own investigations of the count of how many people CPD killed. We only went back 20 years. So, you know, I don't know, like, beyond that definitively. But certainly in at least 2 decades, for the first time, that number was not in the double digits in 2017. And that has stayed true since then. And it's a direct result of the massive organizing that really picked up over the last 10 years, but really the organizing that began, you know, in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s around torture and all of that building. And so I like, you know, and by we I mean Justice for Families and us, we monitor all the killings. There was the first killing of the year happened Thursday. 26-year-old was killed, and we will be organizing around that. It happened on the west side. But in 2014, CPD killed at least 21 people of the official numbers, right? That doesn't include in custody deaths, it doesn't include a whole bunch of other things, but of actual shooting deaths, right? So contrast that with 9, 7, and then 2. It was 2 in, I think, 2021. And that was the lowest we had seen in that 20-year span. It has crept up. It was then 4 in last year, I think, it was 4 or 6. And so there's a real danger of this just being a pause in how CPD operates. They are really trying to overturn all of the, the successes that we have been able to have. They want to go back to business as usual. These 2, state's attorneys, candidates we still don't know who won. Both of them are not great and have the potential to be kind of Anita Alvarez-like, right? So the old guard is really fighting. They're fighting to get rid of TURC, the Torture Inquiry Relief Commission, the only one that exists in the country, which is how survivors can advocate to get their convictions overturned in the courts.
Wait,
so
the Cook County State's Attorney can get rid of that?
No, it's right now going to be. It's in Kane County, Devon Daniels' case. The judge has talked about potentially rendering it unconstitutional. So the next hearing is April 2nd on Tuesday. And if he goes forward with that, and he's retiring, so this might be his last hurrah, right, to just say, a big F you. because they have attempted to do this in Cook County and they couldn't get it done. So if that happens, then it'll go to the Illinois Supreme Court. But they're threatening this. Like the FOP has been threatening to re-incarcerate exonerated survivors. They went after Kim Foxx so hard to try to, so they are organizing. Just looking at
We were talking about joy.
So the joy that it was going to be a different answer.
You gave us several story ideas.
I know. I was like, so wait. Tuesday. What time is that?
Right.
9 a.m. 9 a.m. Tuesday. So the joy is that we are literally, there are lives being saved. There are lives being saved, and when CPD does kill, people respond now. My best friends, who I grew up with, brother was killed when we were 18. It didn't dawn on me to protest, It now is commonplace for families to say, no, I want an answer, and I'm not going to be quiet. So we've changed the culture, we've changed the expectation, the social contract has shifted, and we have, as a movement, saved lives, saved Black lives.
I don't know if I have another question, but I want to publicly tell you my little secret goal. We talk about propaganda all the time, and there's all of these shows. Of course, a lot of them take place in Chicago, of just where the cops are superheroes, and the public has this idea that the police jump in front of bullets and save our lives, but it's very clear that organizers save lives and that nourishing institutions save lives. And I'm just what if beyond journalism we had shows in the popular culture, in movies about organizers and how that saves lives and what that would mean.
This is your film, Morgan.
And that's what I'm saying. Tribe Creative Studios, y'all. We need these stories reaching people in different ways, because how we think about how lives get saved is just not, Chicago is so revolutionary and inspiring because of the work that y'all do, but does it reach a certain, reading level or learning level? That's what we're trying to really work around right now. And it may not be in journalism, it may be in another form. Yeah.
Well, we have to move on. I'm sorry, Mama Jeanette. We ran out of time. So we got to get to our performance of the evening. So the night's not over. There's more. But I want to thank our panelists. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you for your question.
Let me give it up one more time for this wonderful panel. I'd like to thank all of you, not only for your presence here tonight, but for the work that you do and are doing. This evening has been very powerful and moving to me, and I'm touched by the themes of courage and truth, and the reality that in our pursuit of telling the truth, there is often a significant cost. And so as we are thinking about the continuing legacy of Ida B. Wells, when we began planning this event and we thought about who we would want to close out the evening, we were focused on Jamila Woods, and we are thrilled to be able to bring her tonight. Jamila Woods is a singer, poet, activist, and teacher. Her most recent album, Water Made Us, follows two other critically acclaimed solo records, Heaven and Legacy Legacy. As a poet, she has won a Pushcart Prize and has been published in a multitude of prominent outlets, including the Library of America anthology, African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song. Jamila is an inspiration, and as I am thinking about tonight, I am thinking about the power of words. When I think about poetry, I think about poetry as a way of using words to speak to things that are often unspoken. And when I think about music, I think about something that also speaks to the heart. Jamila Woods this evening will be accompanied by the phenomenal Alexis Lombre. let us welcome this celebration to the stage. Jamila Wills and Alexis Lombard.
Thanks so much for having us. We're gonna do a few songs. Yeah, like she said, this is Alexis and I'm Jamila, and this first song is called Heaven. Show me how you do that trick. The one that makes you love someone. The world wants us so numb and alone. Show me how you do it. The one that makes the winters warm. The one where summer never glows. I don't wanna run away with you. I wanna live a life right here. I just wanna fall asleep by you. When we wake, it means one thing. Da 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 da. You see my great, 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 great grandma and your great, 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 great grandpapa. They didn't need a ring or a broom. They didn't need a pastor or bloom. Nothing old, nothing new. Nothing borrowed, nothing blue. They're dancing in the deepest ocean. See, not even death could stop them. No, no, no. I don't wanna run away with you. I wanna live a life right here. I just wanna jump the boat with you. When we dance the ocean waves. Da 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 Show me how you do that trick. The one that makes you love someone. The world wants us so numb and alone. So much of my work is inspired by the work of Black feminists. So this next song is inspired by Zora Neale Hurston, another legend just like Ida who really cared about all Black people and all Black people's voices. So. Must be disconcerting how I discombobulate the mold. I've always been the only. Every classroom, every home. kiss of chocolate on the moon, collard greens and silver spoon, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes you can stick onto me. My weaponry is my energy. I tenderly fill my enemies with light. You will never know everything, everything. I will never know everything, everything. You will never know everything, everything. And you don't know me, so you are the good. You will never know everything, everything. I will never know everything, everything. You will never know everything, everything. And you don't know me, couldn't possibly. Oh, 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 ah, oh, 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 ah, oh, ah. Oh, 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 ah, oh, oh, ah. None of us are free, but some of us are brave. Dare you to shrink my way. I'm on a new plane, I'm all out of fuss to give. Yeah, fearing no way to live. Yeah, it must be disconcerting how I discombobulate the mold. I've always been the only. You're so unoriginal. Your words don't leave scars. Believe me, I've heard them all. I may be small, I may speak soft, but you can see the change in the water. Oh, 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 ah, oh, 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 ah, oh, ah, oh, 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 ah, oh, oh, ah, oh, ah, oh, 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 ah, oh, oh, ah, oh, ah, oh, 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 ah, oh, oh, ah. You will never know everything, everything. I will never know everything, everything. You will never know everything, everything. And you don't know me, couldn't possibly. You will never know everything, everything. I will never know everything, everything. You will never know everything, everything. You don't know me, couldn't possibly. You will never, never know me, no. You will never, never know me, no. And you don't know me, couldn't possibly. Thank you so much. We're going to do one more song, but before I do, I wanted to read this poem inspired by Ida B. Wells, and just say I was so inspired by all of the speakers tonight, and especially hearing from folks who are carrying on her legacy into this present day. The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. Ida B. Wells. In photos of you, every strand of hair, every pearl, every button feels intentionally placed, but no glove is too white to shake on a promise with a brother shooting dice in the alley. He is your kin too, same as the black boys buried in Mississippi air, the cold violence the South keeps quiet until you spill the ink. You dig beneath the lie we've been taught, that somehow we're always guilty, always whistling, too smiling, too sitting down, too upstanding, too breathing, being. Mother, sister, you would gather your race in your arms if you could. You pin the names of our martyrs on your chest. You light a torch in the basement of our country, find the old photographs, white grins gathered beneath brown bare feet, the kind of terror that makes a souvenir of itself, prints a postcard, brags about getting close enough to touch. You write to instill shame in the shameless. You write to call their twisted form of leisure by its name. Your hand holds pen to page, a match against powdered glass. They call you dangerous, most wanted for the crime of loving us too much. You light a flame in our chests. We boil over, reclaim our bodies, remember our worth, fly north, following your words, your promise. Light is a weapon, too. Thank you so much. This last song is called Black Girl Soldier. See, she's telepathic, call it black girl magic. Yeah, she scares the government, deja vu a Tubman. We go missing by the hundreds. Ain't nobody checking for us, ain't nobody checking for us. The camera loves us, Oscar doesn't. Ain't nobody checking for us, they want us in the kitchen. Kill our sons with lynchings. We get loud about it, oh now we're the bitches. Look at what they did to my sister last century, last week. They put her body in a jar and forget her. They love how it repeats. Look at what they did to my sister last century, last week. They make her hate her own skin, treat her like a sin. Oh, why? But what they don't understand, see what they don't understand is, yeah, what they don't understand, see what they don't understand is she's telepathic, call it black girl magic, yeah, she scares the government, deja vu a Tubman, and she don't give a, yeah, she don't give a, she don't give a, na, she don't give a. Ida was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Ella was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Audrey was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Angela is a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Sojourner was a freedom fighter, she taught us how to fight. Asata was a freedom fighter, she taught us how to fight. Ida was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. Rosa was a freedom fighter and she taught us how to fight. See, she's telepathic, call it black girl magic. Yeah, she scares the government, deja vu a Tubman. But what they don't understand, see what they don't understand is, yeah, what they don't understand, see what they don't understand is, she don't give up, yeah, she don't give up, she don't give up, na, she don't give up.
speakers, panelists who've shared their stories with us tonight. My name is Bill Michael, and I'm the Executive Director of the Logan Center for the Arts. And I want to just take a moment to thank all of you for being part of our community, for coming here tonight to celebrate the power of freedom of expression to create change, and to remember that Black girl magic can do incredible things, both in the past, in the present, and absolutely in the future. So let's keep that future going strong. Let's remember all that Ida B. Wells meant to all of us and will mean to us in the future. And we're so thankful you joined us tonight. Thank you for all you do. We look forward to having you back often, whether it's programs for CSRPC, the Forum for Freedom of Expression, or at the Logan Center. And I need to do one more ad, which is that sometimes the written word really matters. So our friends at the Seminary Co-op are out there on the first floor with lots of books from all these incredible artists and authors and scholars you've heard tonight. Thank you so much tonight for being here. Have a really great night, and let's keep Black Girl Magic going long into the future. Thanks, and thank you.